Thanks, Dr. Sable. You have all heard a lot of information about the face-to-face interviews, the in-plant audits, the instrument grading information, and that's just kind of the tip of what we covered during the strategy workshop. So the purpose of the strategy workshop was to bring together about 70 individuals representing producers, packers, our end users. Several of you in this room were there for part or all of that, as well as members of our BQA advisory board, to look at all the information that was collected in phase 1 and phase 2 and to figure out what's that blueprint or that take-home message that we can share with producers and in the community to figure out where we need to focus for the next 5 years before the next audit. And so that's what we did in December. So we took all the information that we had and looked at what is that take-home message. And you see these in your 4-pager, and you can see these outlined a little more detail if you pick up the full executive summary. But we outlined 3 main categories for focused improvement, or big overall strategies, if you will. And the first of those is food safety and animal health, and I'm going to go into these in a little more detail in a minute. Eating quality and reduction of variation or variability in the carcasses, and then optimizing value and eliminating waste. And so if we take each of those individually, you heard a lot of information from Dr. Belk relative to the importance of food safety from our end users, or those that are closest to our consumers. And so that has to be one of our leading areas where we need to focus in the next 5 years. And if we look at some of the tactics that we can look at, or some focus areas on that, one of those would be an information sharing system. And so what are we doing? How can we get information from one segment of the industry to the others? Maybe it's relative to animal identification. Maybe it's improving global market access. If we have that information, lots of things can go into that. The second tactic, if you will, would be looking at preventative health strategies. And so it's not necessarily something specific that producers mentioned in their input, but they did mention BQA, and part of BQA is that use of antimicrobials appropriately and supporting animal health. And so those tie together. And then lastly, a continued effort to improve supply chain safety intervention. And so you should see the link to beef quality assurance, and several of you are involved in that and implementing that on farm and on your ranches and in your feedlots. And so it's just communicating that message a little bit more throughout the system. The second one of those strategies is eating quality and reduction of variability or variety. And so we saw a lot of end users in our strategy workshop talk about how I might order 15-pound and up ribeyes or whatever their spec might be, and they say, but I could have a box that has a 15-pound ribeye, and I could have a box that has a 22-pound ribeye, and that's really hard to cut those for my menu that has 12 ounces on a menu. And so talking about what does a consumer want on their plate, what do we want in a package in the grocery store, and how can we make that uniformity a little bit better from an end user standpoint to make that product kind of desirable or more desirable for the consumer, for their customer. And so developing information systems, again, ties back to the last one, but a key message of communicating between market sectors. Looking at advancement in genetic technologies. Now, if you go back to phase 1, genetics to our end users was color. And so we have a little bit of a disconnect there, but using some genetic technologies to help us improve the reduction of variability in those carcasses and those cattle when they're sent to the plant. And maybe it's improving sorting strategies and having some premium associated with that so that we have the reduction of variability that we need. And then the last strategy that we need to look at is optimizing value and eliminating waste. And the first thing, again, that you see is an information sharing system. So how can we get information throughout the system to clearly give us market signals? You saw that we have 6% of carcasses dragging the floor or dragging equipment. We have carcass weights that have increased. I think it's just over 12% that are over 1,000 pounds. And we have more variability in boxes of product going to our end users, but yet we've seen the discount for weight move up that chain, right? And so I'd have to go back to the data from previous audits of 91 and 95 and 2000 and look at where were the hot carcass weight discounts for producers then compared to where they're at now. But those have definitely changed over time. And again, we can use genetic technologies for this to also manage our carcass variability. We realize that there's barriers to getting this done, and that's one thing that we spent a lot of time on during the strategy workshop of what are the challenges to move forward in these areas. And one of those is communication, not only communication between sectors of the industry, but between segments from production to our end users and getting that message clearly dictated back and forth. But if you run through the end of that list, I'm not going to read all those for you directly. They're in your 4-pager and they're in the executive summary. But that last one is not enough incentive to make BQA a priority. And that goes back to communication and phase 1 information where you had our end users telling us that they have some programs in place or some quality assurance programs in place, but they can't name BQA. And they can't name, they identify different components of beef quality assurance, but they don't really know that they're part of the beef quality assurance program. And so that is one barrier and one way that we can improve. The last part of the strategy workshop is coming up with that lost opportunity. And the lost opportunities that Dr. Belk mentioned earlier are kind of what got us going in the National Beef Quality Audit in the first place. And so we've tried to calculate these every year. And sometimes they're a little difficult to calculate, but we start with identifying what is the target consensus. What should we be producing for our end user population? So we engage them quite a bit during the strategy workshop to figure out what should we be producing from an industry perspective. And this is what they came up with. Quality grade, 5% prime. We're not quite there, but we're getting close. 35% upper 2/3 choice, 35% low choice, and 25% select. Yield grade. Our goal should be 10% yield grade 1s, 45% yield grade 2s, 40% yield grade 3s, and 5% yield grade 4s. That has changed over time. Over time, you probably saw 0% yield grade 4s, but packers are a little more vocal now and they tell us we'll accept a few more yield grade 4s to get a few more cattle that will grade, upper 2/3 choice and prime. And then weight. Our goal should be 20% of carcasses between 600 and 800 pounds, 30% between 800 and 900 pounds, and 50% between 900 and 1,000 pounds. They realize that this doesn't include anything over 1,000 pounds, and that's where 12% of our carcasses fall during the phase 2 or the implant data collection. So using that information, we calculate what we call lost opportunities, and I'd be remiss without recognizing Dustin Pendle at Kansas State. He has helped us calculate these and adjust. If you want to compare over years, you need to go back and adjust over time. So helping us adjust as we change the logic or the way that we calculate these, or as we see things that aren't being able to be reported or prices not reported for 1 year, taking that out of a previous calculation so you have a true comparison. But you can see from 2011 to 2016, we made quite an improvement in quality grade. And that's because we jumped 10% in upper 2/3 choice and prime. Or choice and prime, excuse me. And so that helps that calculation. We lost some ground on yield grade relative to lost opportunity, and that's because of our increase in yield grade 4s and 5s. We lost some ground on carcass weight, but you saw how that carcass weight has increased over time. We made up some ground on hide damage and branding or hide damage and defects that would result in a lost opportunity. And we lost a lot of ground on offal condemnations, and the primary driver behind that is 30% liver condemnations that we saw during phase 2. And so overall, if you look back and compare to the 91 audit, we've made a lot of improvement. And a lot of those improvements that we've seen from 91 to 2016 have to deal with the fact that we implemented a lot of things and put a lot of things in place with beef quality assurance programs. And so from a producer standpoint, you can be proud of the improvements we've made. There's obviously a few places we can work to improve, but hopefully you realize that we've done some things that have helped this over time. And so 25 years of success is what we've witnessed, and there's still room to go, and so we can continue working on that and implementing additional things through BQA or other programs like transportation quality assurance and those sorts of programs that you see coming from producer education.